Hey there, Shopping Maniacs. You're listening to another episode of the Shop Talk Show. I'm Dave Buzzcut Rupert. With me is Chris Coyer. Hey, Chris. How are you?
Yeah, it looks amazing. Is it because it's hot as hell and it feels good, or what was the?
Super hot
Yeah.
in Texas. Like, 90 with like 80% humidity kind of vibes, Just like,
Right.
oof. But
What else though?
what triggered it
Combing?
was my
Yeah.
son got a buzz cut. He's super into it. I don't know. I think
Yeah.
it's a meme or something going around, but I saw him get a buzz cut and I was like, that looks refreshing.
Gelitude.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got really jealous of my son's buzz cut, and so now we
Okay.
both have buzz cuts. And
So, like, how fast does it grow though? Like by Christmas, are you going to be Samurai Dave again, or no?
yeah, I might. It might grow back. I think that last, I got a haircut for job interviews, so that would have been like about a year and a half or so with the old haircut. So,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
I
So
think
you grow up pretty quick. You must take your vitamins, or whatever.
well, I think I just I have a distracted brain, but good hair, So
Sure,
that's what I bring to the table. Hi, well, I'm interviewing for this job. I am pretty distracted generally, but I have good hair, so that's what I offer.
Yeah, totally. When you pull your hair back during an interview, I think that works. It's just a power move kind of.
Oh yeah, I do the
I
sexy
remember Jake
librarian
Elbaugh
thing.
used to work for us with
Oh,
long
yeah.
hair, and we were all just so jealous. We're like, "Duh, that's good hair." And then he buzzed it too, so it was dangerous. Jake, you never came back after you
Never came back.
buzzed
Well,
it. You gotta keep it long.
and there's certain midlife crises you can have, and I felt like buzz cut was a safe one. That was like, I'm gonna change it up.
Yeah.
I already bought a Jeep, and buzz cut is the next one I could do.
Sure.
There's probably a few more, but I was like, these are good ones. So
Fair enough. Well, welcome to the
hey,
No Hair Club. It's nice.
you're back from Amsterdam. You talked a bit about it at with the Brad Frost with the Frost Brothers. How
Yeah.
was CSS Day?
Oh, it was tremendous. I feel like I took so many good notes while I was there, and I'm only half through them at most, because I think that was my style at this conference. So I'm not going to extrapolate too far from that, but was to write down a person, and they could be at a speaker, it could have been a side event, it could have been a conversation in a hallway, and then just write down like a tiny bit about what was interesting about that interaction or something they said or something I want to chase down or something. I don't need elaborate notes, but I also don't want to forget like the highlights. So I'm kind of proud of my notes because I'm just like, oh, here's whatever Breck's interesting thing. And I was like, okay, oh yeah. And all I need is like one line of text to like remember what was so interesting about that. And yeah, it was great, dude. A conference like that's like my number one professional thing. And hanging out with other people who've made it their number one professional thing, and the like nerd language that we speak, and just how niche the conversations can be, like walking up to a conversation. They did the Pac-Man rule thing. Have you heard that, where you don't close the circle entirely?
Oh yeah,
and you
that.
leave the little gap. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Adam was trying to make it the conic gradient rule, but it just didn't catch on.
Yeah,
Because it's like, what kind of conic gradient, Everybody knows what Pac-Man looks like.
HSLA, so we have to line up in like skin
Yeah.
Q-tones
Yeah.
around the circle. That's
I would have
fun.
worked at this one conference. Yeah, tremendous. Really fun. Walk up to a conversation and have it be like about how you can, pass certain keywords within the step function, which is a function that is only relevant within animation timing function. You're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I want to talk about that for an hour, please.
Yeah. It's nice to find your people. I feel like I have those people on my little team at Microsoft. Just people who you could be like, what do we think of custom idents? And that like people have opinions, or, just as dumb as that little tiny feature is. People,
I know. I would love to talk about that. That's good stuff. And now we're using them more and more because like you have to use them for certain things, right? Like you have to use them for an anchor name, or for example, is one of the things where, and you you can't not have it be a custom item. It makes you wonder if if they were around when like keyframes were invented. You know, keyframe animation, you can just name whatever you want. But these days, the things that you have to name whatever you want are tend to require the double dash. And the double dash is confusing because it's like, isn't that what custom properties uses? Yes, but they are custom idents that contain a value. I don't know.
I wonder if we could retcon it and that becomes just the retro standard. Just anything where you invented a name, you put dash dash. I think about this a lot. Like for languages, you know, there's a lot on a good design of a computer programming language, right?
Yeah.
I feel like one of CSS's coolest features was the dash dash WebKit, right? Which is to say, dash dash non-standard. This is made up, and I wish JavaScript.
One dash, I think. Wasn't it?
Oh, dash WebKit. Yeah, sorry, dash WebKit, and then they took that and made it like dash dash my thing. I feel like that was like a great way to say I'm extending the platform. I'm extending things. Then, like if JavaScript had this, and you were trying to be
on
like,
record as defending vendor prefixes.
I'm defending the idea of allowing language extensions in a way that doesn't block the language from growing.
Yeah,
so
I see what you mean.
Like JavaScript's whole, what was it, the flatten,
flatten app or whatever.
Smooshgate. Yeah. Smooshgate, punch on. We need like a good graphic. We need
because one library was just popular enough that it would hurt. You know, it kind of blocked the web platform from doing what it wanted to do, and everybody knew that was unfortunate. I think there was the only drama there was that like, wow, that sucks. You know, but nobody disagreed about the problem or the solution.
But I feel like if JavaScript, Brendan Eich, in the old days, made string.prototype or array.prototype, and then said, if somebody wants to add onto this their own thing, it has to start with a special character like $sign or dash dash, then we would solve so many problems because you can't just patch string. You can't just, and maybe the patchability is a good thing, but you can't just like patch a function or something in, or maybe even just a convention would have worked, that, hey, we don't patch the main thing. We have to like create a new thing and extend it, or we have to, or you have to
it reminds
have
me
a
of data
special
attributes
character
in HTML, where everybody seemed to have gotten the message correctly. That's like, don't just invent your own attributes. Like you can, and it works. But if we just all agree, which we miraculously have, to not
Except
do that,
web components. But go ahead, yeah.
But why is it fine in that circumstance? It still seems not fine to me. It still seems like
I guess because they're never going to conflict with native elements.
They never will, ever.
Yeah. Except in the case if we had the is attribute, like
or extends, right? Like
is fancy button.
Right. That's what I mean. Never. Like that seems wrong. Like eventually you're like, okay, I'm not extending a native select yet. I wish I was, but I'm not. But if they make that happen someday, then I could. And now it is a problem.
Now it is a problem. Yeah. I don't think I don't know if that's going to ever be solved.
Maybe not.
Toothpaste is out of the tube in that situation.
But I get you the point. I mean, we're already talking about niche stuff. If you draw a line in the sand and be like, I will never make up an attribute, you're doing the web a solid, in my opinion.
Yeah. Or if you're always, I will always use a prefix.
And
if
you
break
get a
out
little bonus. You get a little bag of tricks. They give you the data set property to do it. Then you got data set, and data set is nice. So enjoy.
Yeah. There was a proposal a while ago. Matthew CP, is that who it was? But it was about, and maybe Leah Veru was on there too, or part of it, but this idea of sort of like a custom attribute or a registered attribute, sort of almost like a web component, but for attributes. So you could almost build like views, directive syntax, like vif and velse with
you like
these,
register them or something?
yeah, it's kind of like a custom
Why?
attribute sort of spec, and it was pretty cool. I wish it had taken off, but I think you'd
Is
have
it
to
because
have
they
a
can
thing
have
like,
reactive properties and you could make them do special stuff?
Yeah,
Like I think of the ones like, what's the one like checked or whatever, or open on a details element, like dot open. If you set it to true, we'll set the attribute also. It's like, what do you call that? Reflective property or something?
Yeah.
That'd be kind of neat if you could like automatically wire that up. I guess that answers the why question.
Yeah, it would be cool to wire that up. So like vshow, right? If something exists in state, vshow document.body has class foo, you could then show an element. That would be cool for it would be cool to have that on any element, not just custom elements, and not just like doing for loops for this thing and then showing it. It's sort of like you have registered it. It is a attribute that works. It can take any sort of property in there. So it just evaluates a condition is true or false. Anyway, that was kind of like a cool. Anyway, it was a cool spec. It would be cool to have. I think they were saying you have to have a dash in the attribute to make it a valid custom one. So I think that's what they're trying to scope out. Which I
Now
think
that there's more
smart.
and more custom elements, this is another, Adam has a good post on it, but it's everybody's had this thought. I think it's not the most original thought, is that when you name something like keyframes, or even more so now with custom idents, because they have different purposes, like show what the different purpose is, which is a great excuse to use an emoji. So now, instead of it just being superfluous or whatever, just being like this cheesy thing that you can do, it actually has meaning. Like there's an anchor emoji. So if the custom ident, which there can only be one of that name, so it's not like there's any mystery there. If you've set it to be the anchor name, put a little anchor emoji in the name. And then once you've done that, now the barn doors are open. Like what else?
Yeah, that's funny. They support emoji. I'm in a project where I'm stripping out emojis, token project, but and I'm not.
Yeah,
a
fair
fan
enough.
of,
I'm not sure.
Emojis are cute until they are super not, and then you have a lot.
Yeah,
of
they
them.
render differently, and there can be Unicode problems and stuff. So yeah, I don't know that I would, especially on a sufficiently large code base. I think something like open square bracket anchor or something, or ANC or something would be
like
nice
you could
to
have
know.
a
Like I actually
prefix.
think that would be helpful for me. And I would support that.
No, because I got container names are something that don't have a custom ident, but I wish they did. But
Yeah,
like
that's a good
dash
example.
container or whatever.
Yep.
But then, yeah,
Fascinating.
the emoji might be cool because then you could
But-
just do like
but what
box
do isn't-
foo.
I think view transition names also don't need it to be. Ugh. Anyway,
They
some
should.
stuff
That's
does and
I
some
feel
stuff
like we
doesn't.
should. My I was involved in tabs in
Scroll
OpenUI.
timelines do. That's the other.
Scroll timelines do. Yeah. That's weird. But I was involved in OpenUI, and we talk about popover and different things and tabs, and my main concern, and I brought it up a couple times, was I want things to be consistent. We keep inventing things, and then every decade we just change the rules on what we think something is called. And I wish we, or the behavior show modal, show hide, close. And so I wish there was a standard definition, if that makes sense. Like hide applies the hidden attribute. Show, close removes the open attribute or something like that. Just like a very strict grammar or rules, like very consistent API across things. So, because imagine if HTML audio elements had a play function and video had a spin that reel function. We wouldn't like it. They should be the same thing. So,
Right. I don't know. I think things tend to snowball. You make one bad mistake, and then the right answer is to not break it.
the right answer is to not break it, and then people try to fix it in the next one, but we need to
And then
backport
it gets confusing.
the feature.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's hard to change things that exist now. I mean, just as like a tiny aside, I have to. There's certain things that you touch so rarely that you forget how to do it. That was my intro to say I have to update a WordPress plugin. And I just noticed it. I kind of nerd sniped myself. I'm like, I'm going to update that quick. But I'm like, oh, yeah, it's on Subversion now. Which reminds me that every WordPress plugin in the world, I'm sure some people, all the major plugins are actually in Git. And then they wire up some interesting wiring because ultimately it has to be Subversion. That's where all WordPress plugins live. That's what that system is built on. I don't see them ever changing it. It's like, it's so embedded into that world that it's like that's just how it's got to be, even though that technology just sucks.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. I don't know what I couldn't articulate it other than there's not very good software for it. There's not very good documentation for it, and it has this weird concept where inside of a Subversion repo isn't just like the stuff. Like in Git, it's just a repo as whatever you want inside of it. There's no like implied structure to it, but in Subversion there's like trunk and tags and branches, and those things are literal folders. And like it just is a bummer. So if what you can't do, for example, is just like pull down your Subversion repo into your WordPress plugins folder and have it just be the plugin, and then you can make updates and then push it back up. It's like, no, that doesn't work because your actual files are in /trunk/dist or something, and WordPress can't see down into that folder structure to make it work. It's like, bleh.
Man.
Anyway, it's just not going to change because some things never change.
Until I fork WordPress and we have Shop Talk Press. And
Sure.
it's the best. I'm deleting half of it.
There was a little news on half of it. Yeah, do it. The HTML includes world.
There was a pot being stirred over, I think, from Google. Is that, if I have it correct?
I guess, is Noam Rosenthal Google? Yes. And worked on some interesting stuff recently. It's kind of an interesting, because he seems really plugged into the web development community, but is also one of the people who actually put this stuff in browsers. So that's a pretty unicorny person these days.
Yeah,
I'd
he
say.
has a Corner Shape, which there's a great article on Friend and Master's Boost about Corner Shape. But
there's two of them on there now. But he was all behind
new.
that. It's weirdly powerful. You'd think, like, okay, we have corner-shaped Squircle now. Actually think that's wonderful and great, but also not particularly mega super-duper important until, of course, you put Tamani Afif and on the prowl, and then what? You're like, oh, turns out actually you can make any shape in the world based on it. Even though we just got shape, which is wonderful, this is a little easier to put your hands on.
It's more border radius-y, I would say. More.
But you can use it to do pretty interesting things, especially because there's different shapes you can put on different corners. And have all kinds of different values. So you can do the shape thing. If you need unusual, like, shapes are just going to get weird on the web. Is great. And Amit Sheen has a fantastic one on it too. And also this crucial thing that I think is an interesting thing, that when the web platform does it, they like give you some convenience stuff, but then give you the primitive as well. Sort of. So it's like all this, like, we got Squircle now and we got Notch or whatever. I forget what all the particular values are. Scoop and bevel and whatever.
Yeah, scoop, bevel. Super ellipse is kind of the big...
Super ellipse is the primitive one. That's the one where you can do all the other stuff with it. So it's like if Squircle isn't doing it for you, you can use Super Ellipse to rock your own Squircle, which is just so cool. What a nice way to implement that. Well, anyway, that's the guy, Gnome, and has a explainer somewhere. I guess the explainer is titled Declarative Composable Document Updates. So composable same document fragments, which is interesting. Like, you know, when we talked about it, when we had Jake on the show, it was just like, let's have little chunks of HTML that you include. Fine. And then let's just come to agreement about the trade-offs and figure it out. Like, do they need to be complete documents? Do they not need that? Are they blocking? Are they not blocking? All that kind of stuff. This is like, it just feels a lot different. This was like, I don't know, I can do some of that stuff and not other stuff, but it feels like more of the main goal is kind of like I wish I had digested this more. I'll have to stream it one of these days and read it. But it's about re-rendering some of that stuff too. Like, imagine your Next.js app has a main component or something, and that tends to get, like, the details change and it needs to get re-rendered. This is like that. Like, this area of the site can be changed at some point.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think the core of it is this view element with the matches attribute that matches some URL pattern.
Routing,
basically a router. You know, so you could imagine your homepage is, you know, view matches / about, view matches / archives, view matches / contact.
Speaking of VIF, it's like VIF with the URL.
Yeah, I bet Evan U is pissed they're making a view. No, I'm just kidding. It's interesting. And then it pairs nicely. I'm the HTML sommelier. It pairs nicely with the template element. And so then you say template ID foo, and then there's a mode or something attribute that would replace and prepend and append, which I was kind of curious.
This is where I lost it though. I don't get it. It's like, sure, you can put the template later down in the document, but it still needs to be there. So I don't understand what you buy for that.
I think it's the idea of, like, if it matches about, then that template replaces the content in that view element. So it and
they're
then
sitting there right next to each other.
Yeah, why couldn't it be in there?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's maybe weird. But maybe it was to achieve this, like, loading state sort of thing.
Well, and I think it's too. I think I heard a birdie talk that Chrome's getting more serious about getting HTML streaming more robust or something, and that this might align with that incentive, because if you take these templates and you, for example, smash them way down at the bottom of the document or something, maybe that's like more efficient loading or something, or it just somehow jives with streaming HTML better. I don't know.
Yeah,
that's very speculative. This whole thing is speculative, to be honest.
Totally. I think it's interesting. I think, you know, it is kind of trying to pull this SPA style thing into here, which I suppose is handy. I don't know. I'm going to maybe reserve judgment. I just, you know, maybe I'd sit with it for a bit. Because what I kind of want that cells style syntax from Redwood, where you, like, can be like, this is the loading, this is the error, this is the, you know, and I think they have these, they kind of address that. But, you know, I'd also like that's sort of the stuff I'd want to swap in a view based on a template.
DOM heavy too, like all these view elements. Like, what if you have a pretty complicated site? Are we saying you're going to put 1,000 of these view elements just in the first HTML document that loads? Why?
Yeah,
I want more like on-demand loading. You know, if one of these views matches, then go get the content. But I mean, I guess that's what JavaScript already does. So I don't know. I have not digested this whole thing yet, but it does seem relatively interesting. And yeah, I wonder. It's like, does the template tag have a href on it? Because if it does,
no. So yeah,
so it's not really what we're talking about. There is no includes
No includes, but in theory, we could have the include element, and then you pull that template in, and now it's available in the document. So
it could hang out together with
yeah.
this.
So then so in theory, this could potentially work. I think, I think there was I saw Justin Fignani in.
I wonder if it's shadow DOMs
issue. Well, I saw him saying template is not the tool for this, just because it needs its goal is to be a pre-parsed template result.
Okay.
So
not a good like reusing of an element.
Yeah, not a good like dynamic insertion-y sort of thing.
I guess what was nice though is that it doesn't render naturally. So that's probably why GNOME went for it, right? But then then the idea is if the view matches, the guts of the template get plucked out and put up into the view, which okay, neat. But then you're like, well, what does that do to CSS selectors and stuff? Like, can I use them sensibly, or does it have to shadow DOM it, or what? You know, I feel like that it is confusing when CSS gets involved then, to me.
Yeah, I think too, I think it would actually work in like an SPA sort of style thing where like you're basically drawing an island for content and you're saying, if the link matches this, I'm going to fetch a template and put it on the page and then you render it, browser. I'm not going to do the whole like, select this, do a DOM diff, plop this in. Like it just basically a really coarse like addition. So I think that's sort of the intent there. It's based a lot on Hotwired, or if you're on Reddit, HTMX, and so it's that sort of style of kind of like, we have some predefined behaviors that this does. So yeah,
Cool.
At this point, I think my take was I'll take anything.
Give me stuff. Yeah.
I want HTML includes, but if this, I'll take.
Isn't there some native JavaScript routing thing too? I think they do see that. I feel like browser people are always on the prowl for like, what are networks doing that we can steal and ship?
Yes, there's navigator.navigate, which is coming out. It's in Edge and Chrome, according to Baseline, limited availability.
Does it have a matches-y syntax? What does it do?
It has it's kind of like adds an event, right? So it's almost like pop state or push state, right? So you say navigator.navigate / product listing, and then you tie into the history API and say replace. And so it's, this actually looks very similar to that view element sort of, or the template sort of thing. And the idea is, if you hit a back button, you can use the browser's back or what, it's, I think it's good. I'm blanking on like why it's super better, but I think like, push state was kind of clumsy. Like you can just change the URL. Now what? Like
right.
It doesn't.
We had pop states so that you could write code elsewhere, like not like just listen for the URL change in different code. Which is kind of nice. But we already have that, so why is this different?
Yeah, and like you'd have like pop state on a tab open or something like that, and that's like not exactly a navigation. So then it enters the browser history, like so you click back and you're just cycling through tabs as you click back. So I think we need a separate like intent, like we are trying to navigate, and I think just a singular event where you're just like looking for a navigate, not like a URL change, because a million things could change the URL. So you're looking for like a navigate, but it seems like a good proposal to fix sort of the history API's kind of clumsiness.
Well, cool. I still have a bunch of notes from I wonder which ones are interesting to share. It's one of those things too, as somebody who like creates content sometimes, it's nice to turn these little notes into little pieces of content at some point. Miriam was there, of course. I had some interesting stuff. It was talking about functions and mixins and stuff that like seems pretty likely that will come to CSS and ship. That almost it's almost like we get so much CSS stuff recently that it's like you almost have like amazingness fatigue. You're like, Mixins will be so great. I think that's a super good feature for CSS to have. And I'll feel like we'll just go to sleep and have it some morning, even though I know there's like a ton of work that has to happen between now and then. But that's just what it feels like. CSS moves so quickly. But Mixins is an easy one to wrap your mind around, because it's just, you name a mixin. Maybe we'll force it to have a custom ident. That'd be cool. You name it. Dave's rounded corners or something, and then a mixin can apply not just one thing but a whole block of stuff and nested stuff and all this. And I think that can be really cool. The number one use case that was popping through my head while I was at CSS Day is that Adam did a talk on carousel stuff and scrolling. And he's such a cool detail oriented dude that there was just like line of code after line of code after line of code, like polishing up the look and experience of a carousel look. And by the end of it, it's like there's a lot here. Styling the scroll bars, styling the behavior, snapping the scrolling, applying all these buttons and pseudo elements and fancy stuff, to the point where it's really nice and polished at the end, but also not overly designed.
Styled,
like there's not so much going on, right? But it's still like a lot of code, and it's like that could just be a mixin. Somebody could pick that thing up and they could just have it be this generic mixin that you could apply. And mixins also take parameters like functions. So you could say, scroll buttons true.
Catch up on this. I have dogs freaking out. I'll be right back. I'm gonna let them in. Sorry, time out.
Sure.
Time out. 1 second. Got them. Okay. Dogs are great. Dogs are wonderful. Sometimes they eat an entire blanket and impact their bowels, and you have to pay $1,200.
Oh my!
Love dogs. Anyway.
Yeah, totally. Always stories like that. My buddy's dog has been porcupined like 5 times or something like that. I don't think they're gonna make it. Anyway, there's native mixins.
Native mixins, and so
you call it something dash something. We're just gonna assume that they're idents, even though something tells me they're not gonna ship with custom idents. I don't know why.
Let's see.
We'll see if they do.
CSS mixin. CSS.
I think there's barely even an explainer yet. But I also feel like it's almost so obvious that maybe it doesn't need one. So you declare it with mixin, kind of like you're declaring a custom property or whatever, and then you use it with @apply. So that's different. I think it was include in Sass, but now it's going to be apply. I don't care. That seems fine. And then you may or may not pass parameters to it, but that could be like, I want scroll buttons true, scroll dots false. Like if we're talking about this carousel mixin, that seems awesome to me to be able to pass these things in. And then I think, like custom properties, they would re-render if stuff like that changes, or I don't know, like if a property, a value that you're passing a mixin is a custom property, and that custom property changes, then the mixin that got applied would also change in real time. That's the kind of neat stuff that CSS can do that Sass could never do. So like, because I think Miriam was saying, and I think this is a little bit of a hallway conversation, was sure, we can do mixin, but to sell it internally, can we paint a picture that we should do it and not just leave it to Sass? Because there is some pushback on stuff like that. Like if another tool can do it perfectly well or better, why bother doing it? So the picture needs to be painted that it can do things that only the browser can do. And then the re-rendering, my guess is the top thing. I think that's unique to what it could do. There's a related concept in Sass. Do you remember there was the one that the general advice was to never use it? Extend. @extend in Sass, and the idea was that you'd say @extend and then give it another selector, and Sass would go find that other selector and
plop it out.
But it didn't work like a mixin. It didn't take their styles and go put it in this new style. It like comma separated the original selector to have the selector applying to the extend to.
Yeah.
And it meant that you could get some out of order CSS, like it would mess with the the order of CSS a little bit in a way that was a little unpredictable, and you could end up making like super long comma separated selector chains on accident. So it was like not a particularly useful one to say. But this is what it would be easy to paint a picture to browsers. So you're like, look at how poorly SAS had to implement this. And it's not even SAS's fault. It's just that's what the feature did. But you could say browsers wouldn't have to do that. They don't have to do this comma separating selector garbage. Extend natively would just like work. It would just be like, oh, I see. You're trying to take the styles from this other selector. I'll just go get them and apply them. I don't have to actually mess with your authored CSS to do this. So painting the picture for Extend would be easy. I don't think there's any conversation about Extend natively yet.
Extend seemed like always like a foot gun, just because you end up with those super combos selectors, and then now you have all your specificity super jacked.
Right, and like where does that selector get made? Is it after where you're currently authoring, or is it before where you're currently authoring? And you're like, shruggy shrug, I don't know.
Yeah, hopefully it goes to the bottom. It does, so I'm looking at the blog post from Miriam. It does have -- negative or -- button, so mix in.
Oh, so yeah, they are custom idents?
Yeah.
Oh, and it takes Miriam's going to do it right.
It takes it takes parameters, so those are all like -- face.
That's what I mean. Like that's the only reason it would need to re-render is if the parameters changed. Otherwise, there's no reason to re-render a mix-in.
Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting. So it kind of fixes that like calc issue where you have like a CSS variable with calc, or does it where you calced up a CSS variable and it just got stuck? So it kind of fixes that maybe, or
I don't know.
Okay.
Interestingly, that is in my notes here though, because Miriam started talking about that too. So apparently your brains work a little similarly in some way. But speaking of custom properties, they're like almost always valid, right? Like it's very little that you can't give a custom property to make it invalid. It'll just freaking take anything. Like a space, for example, is fine as the value of a custom property. Really weird.
Yeah.
There are a few invalid things, but I don't even remember what they are exactly.
Like
maybe the empty var function.
Yeah.
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 Right. Or even if they're not invalid, they don't work how you'd think. Like URL just becomes a string that says that, which is useless.
Yeah. There's a few twists, right?
Right. So that in some circumstances can be very surprising. And this is too hard to mouth blog, so I'm just going to give you the gist of it, is that like some things like look invalid. So you'd think that the browser would like throw them away, but it doesn't. So this comes up if you set like the color or something to something that it clearly isn't a color. It doesn't matter. The browser's going to throw it away when it's used. But by the time it's done that with custom properties, it like, I don't know. It's I absolutely just need to write this up. And I think some people kind of intuitively know this, but it leads to those little CSS quiz kind of things where you're like, look, these three selectors.
Kevin Powell ones that were
like these three selectors. Yeah. All apply a different color. Which color will it actually be? And it's like it tends to be a unintuitive one. And the reason it's unintuitive is because like the custom property is, even though it looks invalid, is actually valid and blah blah, and it never goes and like reevaluates it later. I know that's too hard to explain, but I was so into how Miriam explained it that I need to do it myself so I can.
Somebody should make one of those quizzes where it's like, what color is it, red, blue, or green? But then it's like, but it's actually hooked up to like an animation of a bomb with like wires, and you have to clip the right wire. Like,
oh my god,
the trigger is.
Great. CSS is already stressful, and you're just gonna crank up.
Yeah, just give it like CSS or die. Graphic. We need graphic packages, Chris. Yeah, I that's interesting. Yeah, I was dealing with this. CSS tries to help you. It tries to figure out what you're doing. Yeah, but then when it can't, it says later. I'm out. Bye. Where HTML will like partially render your garbage. CSS actually is the opposite, and it says like I I'm going to ignore this piece, bud. It looks like you got carried away. And that's frustrating because HTML is showing it. CSS is like bailing. And then JavaScript is like, I don't work at all. Like, I'm just, dude, you had PX on a number. I just quit, So it's really, there's this like gradient of support or like interpretation of values. And it's just, it's kind of funny.
You could argue that it used to be simpler. I mean, that stuff has always been true, but this idea that like custom properties exist now and their values are cached and that can be computed was like a complication of the language that it would be a valid opinion to say that CSS jumped the shark when they did that. And then it almost, like it almost has like an execution order now that's weird and stuff. I don't think that. I generally think putting power in CSS is nice, but they wouldn't be wrong for saying that, But I did get the vibe there, really surprisingly, that like as fast moving as CSS is and all this powerful stuff, that it's gonna start slowing down. Like this is always feels like a joke to say, but it's kind of approaching a level of feature completeness.
CSS?
Like now that, yeah, CSS. Now that we have like really strong layout mechanisms, and there's still some stuff it needs, some better paging and some better region stuff, and maybe we could get double slash comments someday. That would be neat. But like, there's not so much left to do, and maybe we'll all eat our words, and there's a lot to do, but that CSS super time is going to slow down.
I wonder if functions, which is kind of tied up into this Mixins thing.
It is. They can only be a value, by the way, so it's good to remember that a function can only just return one value.
Mm-hmm. And we have if in Chrome now, right? Chromium. I wonder if that's the end game for CSS in some ways, but not like because now all these features were like, oh, it'd be so cool if you could like, I don't know, like split a variable up into different parts and apply them or something like that, like a composited variable or whatever, a random seed gen or something like that. And you like could split that up in style based on that or something like that. I think we're getting very close to where you can do that stuff and through functions and, these little pet features where I want a shorthand for this. It's like, well, CSS is like, hey, well, we have mixins and functions now, so there's your shorthands. Good luck. Like Sass didn't evolve super much after it got all these sort of primitives or logic loops
because it kind of didn't need to. Certain things are just kind of done. I ended up talking about CSS modules in the talk because my talk was about scope, and you should look at the node or the GitHub commit graph for CSS modules. They just like thought it up in 2015, and there's a bunch of commits, and then that's it, And then I looked, there's like one little spike in like 10 years later, where they just fixed some stuff in the README. Like otherwise untouched. And I think technologies like that are cool, that like there's a flurry of work and it does something really nice and then they just leave it alone
and we say goodbye.
JSON, a classic example.
Yeah,
functions are okay. I think it's fascinating to look at them because CSS doesn't have an execution order. So we're so used to reading functions as like, well, then at the bottom of the function, you return something. I know there's early returns and stuff too, but you think of it as like, it does this and then this and then this. Like functions they feel like they need to have an order to them, but they just do not in CSS. You can return in the middle of it, whatever you want. But it doesn't mean that the stuff after that return, or they call it something else. It's not return. They use some other word. I forget what it is.
Is it not at returns or something? But
value. I don't know.
At result.
Instead of return. Sure, fine. I think that it was partially for that reason, is that they like it behaves differently than return does. Return makes you think that the rest of the code after it will not be run, and that's not true in CSS. So it is true that the first one that it, like if you had a media query above it that returns something, that like that one will happen first, and then that will be the return value. So it like kind of matters the order, but not entirely. It's weird to think about.
Yeah.
A function with no order.
So like, here's an example. I had a CSS idea the other day where it'd be, the problem was like, people put cards. It's always freaking cards, man. You have cards, and so now your background needs because you have a card, you have to have a background color, right? A grayish, right? And then you put the card on, and that's another grayish. And then somebody's like, I want another card on top of the card. And so you put a card on top of the card. And then you put now the cards are really big, and you have a bunch of cards. And then there's going to be another card in there. So like you start layering up these layers with backgrounds and colors. And so you need the background color to kind of like change, but you can't be like card background purple, you can't be like a static value there, or even like a static
right.
CSS variable, because you're like, you need that to change based on the stacking context. And so I was like, it would be cool to have stacking context aware styles, like you pass like background color stack parenthesis color 1, color 2, color 3, and then it would see if it's on the current thing and pick the next one.
Interesting. Almost like an if that is aware of stacking context.
Yeah.
You have a further thought, so keep going.
Well, so this has already been invented. Kizu, CSS wizard Kizu, has like a post on, it's called Alternating Style Queries, where he's kind of just switching between two colors, sort of flippy flopping, which is awesome, or three colors, I guess. Which is kind of cool, because I think eventually you do sort of want to maybe...
You have to kind of like trap one of the variables and then use a style query.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think style queries are fine, but one, there are a lot of times the example use cases I see are mixins. That's what it's trying to do. And that they can only do custom properties, which doesn't match with people's mental model of what a style query is. They think they should be like, oh, well, if the style is z index 5, then do something. But you can't, because it only works with custom properties. So I'm kind of like a weird anti-fan of style queries, because I think we just need the other stuff that people are actually trying to do with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anyway. You want like if background pink or whatever, not like...
Which it should be able to do, but it can't.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so there's a way to, like, if you just sort of like have these variables, like, if background is some, or, or maybe you're even just saying like
you can use
layer.
If is what you're saying?
What's that?
Maybe. Now you can use if.
Yeah. Well, if, and Miriam came back with if, and then you could maybe chuck that if inside of a mixin, and then now we are very close to my idea of like a stack function. Like, you know, it would have to be -- stack, but I'm okay with that. Because I think there's just this sort of powerful thing of like, hey, we could start kind of like building out these, more complex UIs, more responsive, but, not have to wait 20 years for a browser to ship a feature. So it's going to be interesting. I don't think, I don't know. I'll walk back my CSS's complete comment, because I do think there's things that can do still and needs to do, but I do think like, I think the intent, going back to even Houdini or whatever, to put the power in the hands of the user is good. Like, it offloads so much of what, the language has to do if you give people the tools to build their own things. So
yeah, speaking of things that are dead, that seems very dead.
What's that?
Houdini,
I think, is busted. I have Houdini on my site. I'm using a Paintlet, and I have to figure out an alternative.
I just mean they're not going to rip it, probably. I just mean like as a concept, it had all these lofty ambitions, which are
and I think I can like upcycle the parts of it and be like, generate, hey, off-screen canvas, generate me an image, and then I'm going to make that my background image. So, that stinks, but
But that
it's
was
like,
easy. That seemed like, okay, sure, it's a canvas and you paint it. Like you didn't have to like invent entirely new universes out of that. It's like
Yeah.
canvas to BG. Got it. Whereas there was a promise that you could invent your own layout mechanisms. Like that is just not. We never saw a single example of it. I don't think. I mean, I think there was some kind of
demo, but
did it use? I don't know how it worked. It wasn't quite.
It just did grid and then minused pixels as they were available or something.
Right,
So,
but like, what if you wanted different grid? It was like, how much code are you writing to do that? Like, are you?
Yeah, what would it
It's
take
like
to
writing
get
a browser?
display Mondrian? Like, would you ever be able to do that? Just like fractals and like
Yeah, no cheating. You can't
Yeah.
use any other layout mechanism. You have to,
Yeah.
write an entirely new one and have every single case interact with every other possible thing. Like, it just seems implausible to me.
Yeah. So
But whatever. I don't mean to be a naysayer.
yeah, lofty, but yeah, it I think it didn't take or didn't
Yeah. Well,
maybe
you've been on
it's
a
too-
resizing text bender a little bit. Was that just today you hit publish on
Yeah,
that one?
well, I posted like a blue sky a toot last
I
week.
remember us talking about it in the Discord.
Yeah,
It
we
was
were in
like
the Discord. Somebody mentioned it, Ginger maybe, and then I was like, "Hey, wait, I think we can
I
do
coughed
this."
up an old PHP implementation of it that I used on my quotes on design site, but it was I looked at the code and I was like, "Oh my god, I feel like 5 years old looking at that code." It's like split string by characters. If characters greater than 10, then font size equals 32 pixels or something. I wrote
Yeah.
some very magic number-rific.
Well, I've done the same thing in JavaScript. You're like, if numcars greater than 32, add class large. It's that sort of thing, and it was cool, but it never felt right. It never felt like
The less characters, the bigger the text. The more characters, the smaller the text. That's what we're trying to do here, right?
Yeah. So, and that's the trick is inverse sizing. Like with fit text, I figured out linear scaling. Like how to make it scale with the parent width. Like
Sure.
you are scaling based on the space available, right? But oftentimes that's not what you want. What you want is if you have very long text, if you are like me and you write a small novel for your page titles, you actually want that to take up less
Be
space,
smaller.
but still have like hierarchy in the system.
Yeah.
You want this long text to like shrink to an appropriate size based on how many characters are in there. You have to measure the text. Like there's no CSS text length or whatever. So that's
or
unfortunate.
HTML. Yeah, at some point you gotta count them.
So you have to.
You could do it server side though.
I do it in my template, my Jekyll template, and but you can do it in a very quick JavaScript loop, like query selector all H1,
Split.
H1 data numcars or H1
Oh,
data
dot
set
length, I guess. If it's a
numcars
string
equals
already.
text content dot length. Yeah. So pretty simple to do, like from getting that length. But the trick was that never worked until the adder upgrades, because we talked about it, I think, last week on the show.
Sure, you could set data number chars equals 88, but 88 is a string and not useful in CSS.
Yeah, so it's going to try to if you try to put that in some math, it's going to be like 95 divided by string, and it just craps out, and CSS does nothing, kind of like what I was saying earlier. So what's cool is now you can typecast it and say that's a number now. So every time when you pull this in, it's a number. And there's another trick, like not all browsers have that. So we actually just define the property and set an initial value, and we tell it's a number too. So like when it's doing its division, but the secret sauce is a ratio. So you come up with the ratio, like your ideal characters per line, which is
okay.
For a heading, I'm going to just say it's 45.
I feel like ratio is a fancy way of making a magic number okay.
Yeah, it sort of. It's ideal characters per line divided by the number of characters in your thing, the numcars that you actually have.
Yeah.
So
And number
now
characters per line is actually like a decision.
Yeah, it's a typographic principle, I guess. It is,
Yeah.
66 for like content is ideal, but you read blog posts, it's anywhere from 40
To
or sorry,
70 or something.
yeah, 45 to 70, but on mobile it's maybe 30 to 50 or something like that. So I picked 45, but you can do whatever you want. I'm not your boss. So we take the yet I'm going to be boss of the internet soon. So you take that, you make a ratio, and what's critical about that is your ratio is now inverse. Small text will be like 45 divided by 20, and so that's going to be a number greater than 1, so it's going to try to multiply it big, right? Or if it's long text, it's 45 divided by 200, so now that's a very small number. So when I say like, and now I put it in a clamp function, I have a min font size 1em, a max font size 4em, and then I'm going to times that max font size by that ratio, that inverse ratio.
Right.
And large text, or short text, sorry, I should say short and long text. Short text will have
It's bigger.
It'll try to get bigger, but it'll get clamped down immediately. So it hits the max. That's what you want. Long text it actually, because an inverse fraction is going to divide the text. And so it's going to like shrink down until it hits the min.
Yeah.
And there, Bob's your uncle. So pretty simple.
Clamp. So clamp is a crucial aspect to it too, because you don't you want limits to what's going on with this ratio.
Yeah, I mean you can roll without it for sure, but that's not what you want because you need legibility. And then you can also use that to like maintain, hierarchy.
Yeah. This is funny. It's like really related to the fit width stuff. Because it kind of is that, but it's not quite, because that didn't care about how much text there was. Not really. It just wanted to fit edge to edge.
Yeah, so that's fit to width is Kizu's thing. Again, CSS super genius. I do the dumb things. I depend on other people to do the very smart things. If you want to exact...
Kizu Roman's thing was also used clamp though. It does do the smart thing where it's like, well, don't make sure it doesn't get too small.
Yeah,
which is nice. Thanks, clamp.
I think that's great. And so I actually want the text wrapping feature. Like, so that's kind of why I just do the one axis. I don't try to exact fit it. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Optional max was a neat trick in that code too, by the way, just while we're mouth plugging interesting CSS tricks. So in clamp, it's the minimum, then the really variable thing is in the middle,
kind of like a scalar value usually, like a
right, that like hopefully it's going to use that value, but if it's too little it'll get clamped by the smaller number. Then the third one is the maximum, so it's like minimum, ideal, maximum. So I always struggle with what to call the middle one. Scalar, I guess. But the maximum he set to var -- max font size comma infinity times 1 pixel. So it was an optional maximum value. It's like it doesn't set a maximum value because the fallback is infinity, so it doesn't really have one. But if you want to, you can set max font size, and then it will clamp. I thought that was a very clever little mini trick, is to have an optional maximum.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah,
variable fallbacks.
I think for that situation, I think you do need it, right? Like, because you're trying to just grow it until it stops, right? Like you just grow until it stops. So, hey. So I made this trick, posted it. Paul Irish came back and actually made kind of that fit to width text thing.
Like 2025 Paul Irish?
2025 Paul Irish.
Out of nowhere?
Oh, Hail Mary. Ghost appearing from like a
did he fork a pen?
He forked a pen.
I didn't even know he had a CodePen account.
Well, there you go. So Paul Irish came back from retirement to fork a pen of mine. But he basically replicated this exactly fitting with text thing, kind of setting the font size or the ideal CPM based on what it was, And it's not exact, like you'll see like little, half pixels or, you could, but optically it looks correct, right? So,
absolutely.
So it's a pretty efficient tool for that, like too. So you can achieve that effect. Use Kizu's thing if you need it exact, but this thing has...
I was tempted to. I was trying to do some fit to width stuff. When it's almost decorative sometimes what you're trying to do with fit to width. Like it's generally like a fairly small word that becomes enormous, like the homepage of fit text or whatever. And I was like, you can do this with just a viewport unit. You know, like it's a magic number then, so that's a bummer. But and I know that you're supposed to put a little calc in there and put in some rems or something so that it scales with the user's choice too. But like almost not when it's A, enormous already, and 2, it's just a decoration. Like it's barely it's, you know, I don't know. Like it was like one of the rare cases where I'm like setting some text in a viewport unit is like almost okay. If it's a one-off that's enormous anyway.
Yeah.
Not to,
Yeah. Well, and it, you know, if you know what that text is, you know, there's like this issue of localization, you know, like what if it translates and stuff like that. And, you know, to be honest, mine doesn't really account for that because because you'd have to recalculate data numcars if it translated and you don't get like a Google translated this page on the fly event, you know. But
no, I don't even know how. Like, how does Japanese split cars? Would the characters be way lower?
Yeah, I wonder. I wonder how it would work. Yeah, characters would be way lower. I mean, that's actually like the ideal CPM for Chinese, Japanese, Korean. CJK is actually smaller too. It's actually 30 to 50 as well.
Well, it seems like the characters are much more detailed. You'd like want them to be bigger.
You want them bigger, and you want. I actually learned this recently. I was talking to a team in China, but you want like more line height in between, like the rows.
Okay.
You want. Actually, letter spacing. You want to actually use the letter spacing property in CSS to
cool.
kind of give them a little smooch. But then you also are, you know, the line length, how they break is really important. Like you don't want a word to get cut off. There's new CSS actually to fix all that stuff. And somebody had a really great post on this recently. I can't remember.
Was it baked into the text wrap pretty conversation?
I think it was around that, but it was just basically like, here's what you need to know about, you know, internationalization. And it was a really, really good post. I wish I could remember who did it, but
gosh, now that's ringing a bell too.
I want to say like,
I'm like
Heather
article
Bushell
about
or
CSS
something
stuff.
like that.
Quiz me, you know?
Yeah, no, this would be my death knell on Leet Heat. Just who
I
wrote
also
the
know what you
article?
mean,
Ah!
Yeah, it's exactly. It was like that. It was things you need to know about, or things I wish I knew about internationalization. It was
I could
really
tell you
detailed
everything from that article. But
I feel like the layout
who
was
wrote
kinda
the article,
pink,
and
too.
I'm like, yeah. I'm terrible with names. So so there's a lot of concerns there. But yeah, so it should still work. But yeah, it would be kind of different. You know, so it's maybe single localization, or you know, Western, or like whatever your geo region is. Like if you're Cyrillic, or if you're German, or if you're, you know.
Yeah. Tricky. Of course it's tricky, though. Fortunately, for the most part, I think we're playing around, right? We're stretching what CSS can do. We're having a little fun with this stuff. If we had to ship it to the homepage of Microsoft and we knew that it was going to be translated and all this type of stuff, we would do better.
No one here has asked for this, you know. So
No.
0 people asked for this. I need it. It's just this. I write long headings, and it annoys me when I pull up my phone and it's 4.5 rem or what m, and it's like 20 miles long, you know. So that's kind of frustrates me. So I'm glad I have a solution now. So
yeah. God, there's so many other ones too. I'm thinking of not previous tricks of I remember how slides.com used to work, you know, Hakim's thing.
Oh,
that
yeah,
would, like when a slide got, I don't think it was based on the length of the text, but you know, a slide needed to scale exactly. It did, like no reflowing was desirable, and he did it all with transforms and stuff that I thought was pretty cool. But that was my original thinking on quotes on design, is I wanted like each quote to like approximately take up the same amount of space, whether it was few words or lots of words or whatever.
Yeah.
And fortunately, just setting some hard pixel sizes back then like got close enough, because the requirements of that project were pretty loose.
You could do it with this. You just, instead of a font size, you said scale with a clamp. Bingo, bango.
All right, man. We done did it. I don't know even remember what we talked about today, but it was probably
Websites,
important.
So big, important website. So thank you, dear listener, for downloading this in your podcatcher choice. Be sure to shard it up. That's how people find out about the show. Follow us on one of the good ones, Mastodon or Blue Sky Shop Talk Show, and join us in the Discord. Somebody pointed out today we don't have that on our website, but remember this URL, patreon.com/Shop Talk Show.
We don't link to Patreon?
I don't think
Really?
so.
How does anyone find it? Oh my god, that's crazy.
They are closers.
Google
They're
it.
cool
Oh,
people
it's
who
totally
listen
in the
to
header.
the end.
They're
And,
looking in the footer probably where it should also be.
it's in the
it is
header.
in the header.
Oh.
That's pretty weak. Weak sauce. We should take a lesson from Brad and Ian, who promote their new course with giant links, which is what you should do when you do a bunch of work on something.
Yeah.
Although maybe we should make our link extra tiny then, because while we hang out in Discord and love it, the amount of
Maybe we should
work I'd say we put into
we should
it is
put a function that scales our website, based on how much work we do.
gets smaller and smaller. You have to if you want it to be 100%, you have to have committed in the last week.
Yeah. Otherwise, it
that's
just
hilarious.
starts every day. It goes like
little bit smaller.
0.01 like smaller or whatever, and just kind of based on last Git commit.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
All right. Chris, you got anything else you'd like to say?
SVG filter to make it all squiggly.
Yes, please.
I don't. I'm just going to say shoptalkshow.com. Actually, Dave has to do the like and subscribe stuff first, which you have memorized, surely.
Oh, no, I said I like it. So
You already said it?
Yeah, I said it. I said we're good.
Oh,
Then I went on Patreon.
Where am I? Shoptalkshow.com. See you next week.